All right, going live.
Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. It is time for another Wood by Wright Live and we have a lot coming up. Now if you are new to this, at the beginning of every live we do a quick recap of events coming up. So if you want to come and meet me at those events as well as other tool sales and things like that happening in the woodworking world. But, oh shoot, I left my pad over there. Also, they are listed down in the description down
I can
below.
throw it at you.
Yes. So if you want to see them as well as links to all of them, they are listed down there. And I'm going to try and keep that list up to date down in the description. First thing coming up in June 14th to the 17th is the National MWTCA meet. Biggest tool sale in the world. You do have to be an MWTCA member to go to any of the MWTCA meets. But it is the best $25 you will spend because you get a lot of other things with it as well as the invites to all of the meets. So that'll be in June in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Then in July on the 16th, I'm going to be at the Patina meet. This is another tool collecting group. This is out of Washington, D.C., and that'll be on July 16th. So if you're anywhere near that, Patina is the place to go. Washington, D.C. is the place to go. July 29th is Greenworks, and this will be somewhere in Ohio. This is hosted by Rex Kruger, and I'm going to be doing a talk there. And he hasn't put out the final notes on it yet, but it'll be coming up in July, so stay tuned for that. But also, if you are down south on July 20... Wow, I'm having gas issues all of a sudden. July 29th in Florida. Florida, hand tools are a little harder to find, but in Kissimmee, just outside of Orlando, is going to be an MWTCA meet. It's not put up on the website yet, so if you want to go to that, let me know and I can get you the link to the guy who's actually hosting it. So that's going to be in Florida, Kissimmee. That's on July 29th. If I wasn't going to Greenworks, I probably would have gone down for that. September 1st through the 2nd is Handworks. If you can go to one event this whole year, Handworks is the one. It's free. It's an entire town dedicated to hand tools for 2 days. Every maker of hand tools will be there. You'll have several places where you can buy antique hand tools. You'll have all of the names there. Roy Underhill will be there. It will be an absolute blast. It's free to go to. You go to handworks.co, and it is in Amana, Iowa. Next one, Raleigh, North Carolina on September 16th. I'm probably going to be making it to that one. I haven't set that one in stone yet. That's another MWTCA tool meet, September 16th. And then the last one I have on the list is September 28th through the 30th in Des Moines, Iowa. That is the second national MWTCA meet. There's 2 of those a year, one in June, one in September, October. So I'm looking forward to being that one. With all that being said, let's dive into the Q&A. If you have any questions, throw those down in the chat. If you are watching this recorded, then feel free to read down through all of the questions. I'll put this down all down in the chat so you can jump to where those questions are roughly in the list. I'll try and put a timestamp beside all of them. So, with all that being said, what do we have, babe?
Lots of new people. Hi, and
Hey,
welcome.
we like new people.
We do.
We like old people too.
We like people. But not one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. Anyways, Ken Carlile asked, I'm a bit of a broken record on this thing, but I'm kind of baffled. My number 81 cabinet scraper is still giving me trouble. It chatters across the board, leaving gouges. What might I be doing wrong?
All right, the number 81 is like the number 80, except for it has a wooden sole on it, and it's a little bit higher up. And because it's a little higher, there's a little more leverage on the handles, so sometimes holding it down flat on the wood. You don't want to just have the pushing forward force. You want to actually have a little bit of a down force on it too. It can be depending upon what wood you're on. If you are on a hard wood, often really hard, dense woods smooth or plane easier. Some of the softer ones, like pine and poplar, where the blade can sink in, it causes it to sink in and cut a little ways and then skip out to the next one because it's actually digging in deeper. So softer woods are actually much harder to work with than hardwoods when it comes to scrapers. The other thing it could be is it could be that you have it set too deep, especially with the scraper plane. You want to have it backed off so it's not taking any shaving at all, and then just give it a slight tweak forward so it's giving a little bit into it, and you're just going to go until you get a slight shaving on there. You don't want it to be digging in. That's usually the chatter problem. The last Probably the most common is that it's not sharp enough. And yeah, learning to get a good burr on a scraper is difficult. But if you can get it with a card scraper, cabinet scraper is going to be a little bit easier. So if you can get it on a card scraper, then that's probably not the problem. Most of the time it's digging in too much, or you're working on a soft wood, which takes a little bit more finesse to actually make it work. Good question though. What's next? But if you do have questions, feel free to send me a video or something like that. I'd be glad to take a look at it. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, you did.
I'm good at it.
You made me think of when we were both driving back from Chicago and you thought you were going to win. Haha, and I pulled out for the lead at the end. But anyways, we're not competitive. Warren Munn asks, what's the best plane to get as a first plane? I figure it'll get pretty well beaten up early in its life, so not after a super expensive one. Cheap and nasty is good.
That is going to depend on you and what you're doing. The first question that usually is should I get a 4 or a 5? Usually you're going to want to get one of these two for your first plane. And if you're going to be doing a lot of boxes and small items, things that are like 2 foot in diameter and smaller, then usually I'm going to say a number 4 is the size you're going to want to get as your first primary plane. If you're going to be doing things that are bigger, like you want to make furniture, you're probably going to want to get a number 5. You can do all of the smoothing with a number 5, but it gets heavier and you can't do quite as much spot cleanup as you can with a 4. And with a 4, you can do all the spot cleanup, but jointing becomes much more difficult. And so longer boards, you want a longer plane. So ask yourself, what type of build are you going to be doing more often? The next thing is then, should I get antique or should I get new? If you can get antique, sometimes that's the best way to go, because affordably, they're relatively affordable depending upon where you are. Some places they're not, some places they are. The problem with going antique is you have to ask yourself, how do you like to learn? Do you like to bash your head against a wall and learn at the School of Hard Knocks? Or do you want something that just works right off the bat and you know what good is? Because if you go with an antique, you've got to restore, you've got to put a lot of time and effort into it, and you're probably going to be banging your head against a wall. And it's one of those things that it's a great way to learn, because once you've learned it, you've restored it, you've got it up and running, you know everything there is to know about it, and you can make it work. But if you're the type of person where you're easily frustrated and can push you off it, you're probably going to want to go get something that's new and nice. When it comes into buying brand new, you're going to ask yourself that same question again. If you want something that's good, ready to go, and functional, just needs to be sharpened, you're probably looking at something in the range of maybe a Stanley, the new Sweetheart planes and up. So you're going to be spending 150 plus. The next step up would be the Wood River and Veritas and Lee Nielsen, and before you get into the really crazy ones. But most of those are going to be relatively good chance they're going to be ready to go. If you want to spend a little less and you're willing to do a little bit more setup, the best bang for the buck for someone who has a little bit less money is probably going to be the Tay Tools hand plane. There are a few quality control issues. Every now and then one comes out that's not where I would want it to be. But for the most part, they're actually pretty good for the dollar put into it. I've been wanting to do a cheap plane test for a while and actually get a bunch of them in here and set them all up and see what it takes. But I like that price point and that plane. There are cheaper ones that you're going to spend far more time on, and there are more expensive ones that you can still spend far more time on. But I like the Tay Tools, and particularly for you being in Australia, they do ship internationally. So yeah, hope that helps. What's next? Looks like we're getting quite a list of questions.
Yeah. So
if we don't get to them all, I'm sorry. But if you throw up a super chat, we will get to yours.
We'll probably get through the list that we have. It's going forward.
What's next?
Let's see. Warren asks, spacing of French cleats and how wide a piece did you use for the cleat? We'll be redoing my wall from scratch once my brain heals after next week.
You know, when I built this wall, my thought was, I'm going to have French cleats because I might want to move things around on it. I hung all these items up here and they have never been moved. Ever. Any one of these racks. None of them have been moved. So honestly, if I had to do it again, I would just screw them onto a solid wall. I'd have a wall that has solid plywood or planked wood onto it, and I just screw them on the wall. I wouldn't mess with French cleats. Unless you think, yeah, I'm going to be moving around a bit. French cleats are nice for that. But honestly, no. I would just screw things to the wall. I know it's a little sacrilegious, but honestly, I haven't moved them. Why would I want to do French cleats again? I wasted 2 days worth of work building a French cleat wall when I could just been done with it.
But it looks so pretty.
Yeah, you can see them too, so.
And you've made puzzles out of it, so.
As to sizing, I like about 2.5 inches wide. It's a solid enough surface you're not going to worry about it splitting out, and just all around a really good setup for it. As to how even to space them, that depends on how often do you expect to be moving things, how small are your racks going to be. I like about 12 inches, center to center 12 inches, or point to point 12 inches. I think I put mine at like 10, but I think 12 inches would have been a little better. But if you're going to have smaller racks, then you want to put them a little closer together. If you're just going to have big racks, then you can get away with them putting like 2 feet apart. So it just depends on what you want to hang on the wall. But if I had to do it over again, and when I build my dream shop, I'm screwing them to the wall. What's next? What are you chuckling at?
What am I talking? You should know better. Anyways, Dad Gamet asks, King James, as the representative of the unplugged world of woodworking, if the tool gods mandated that you must use one power tool on every project, what would it be?
The drill. Honestly, there are times when I like using a brace. Actually, quite a few times. And most of the time, if the hole is larger than 1/4 inch, I much prefer to use a brace over a drill. But there are a lot of times when this is just nice, especially when doing small things. If you're doing any metalworking, it's nice to just have a drill you can go to town on. And so, yeah, every now and then I'll release the demon-possessed electrons and have a little bit of fun. The other end of the spectrum is, and for me, if I had one power tool for the general woodworking shop, it would be a thickness planer. I kind of go back and forth between thickness planer or bandsaw. Bandsaw is great for breaking down stock into bigger things, into smaller things. But the vast majority of the time being saved would be from a thickness planer. If you're going from rough stock, a thickness planer saves you days of work thicknessing and flattening boards. And a bandsaw will save you a few hours of work. So I would lean that way. But I know there's a lot of people who get boards that are pre-dimensioned top and bottom. And in that case, a bandsaw is great for ripping them all down. And a bandsaw over a table saw, because a bandsaw has far more flexibility in what it can do. A table saw takes up a lot of space. A bandsaw doesn't take up much space. So it's far easier to work on a bandsaw than it is on a table saw. What's next?
Hang on a second. Kenny-Anjanette Horn
Hey, Kenny.
says, when jointing the edge of a board for a panel glue up and the edge has a knot or reversing grain, how much of a problem is tear out?
A lot of problem. Yeah, so if I'm jointing a board, here, let me get one that's, oh, here we go. We got one with a knot. This one I made for an epoxy demo. So on this side, the grain's going up this way, and on this side, the grain's going up this way. So if I plane it this way, this grain will be pretty, and this grain will all get tear out. And if I plane this way, this grain's pretty, and this grain gets tear out. And so what I generally end up doing is, if there's a lot of work into it, I will get a scrub plane or something else and take it down to about a 1/16 inch away from the depth, because it's rare that I'm going to be getting more than a 1/16 inch of tear out deep. At that point, I'm going to set up a joiner plane that's relatively decent. I'm not going to make it crazy tight, but I'm going to make it so that the tear out on that is relatively small. And then I'll take it down pretty close to the line, but stay a little ways away from it, depending upon how much of tear out I'm getting. And then with it jointed, either I'm going to set up one of my jointer planes as a smoothing plane, and I'm going to sharpen the blade really, really fine and get everything tight, and then I can just go right at it. Or usually at that point, I'm going to grab my smoothing plane, and I'm going to take off that last 3/400ths of an inch and get rid of all of the tear out with the smoothing plane. And that'll give me a nice smooth edge. Now that being said, if I'm jointing the board to glue together a panel, I don't really care if there's that much tear out in this. And if there's tear out along the edge, I'm going to spend more time on it. But micro tear out, I'm really not going to worry about too much. The glue will fill in a lot of that. Yeah, you'll see a little bit more of a glue line, maybe, but usually I don't worry about it too much on a glue-up joint. But yeah, I just spend more time staying a little ways away from the line, and then I'll finish it up with a well set up smoothing plane. In that case, you can go against the grain and have a lot of fun. This feels nice. What's next? I like to ask her that question while she's in the middle of typing something.
Yeah, pretty much.
I have a certain set of skills. And knowing my wife is one of them.
After all this time, it's par for the course. I'll know you're dead when you stop. Let's see.
No, I'll still find a way to do it afterwards.
Brandon Westfall, what did he ask? Howdy from Kentucky. How are floats different from rasps and files?
Floats are basically a one-tooth file. Let me grab off a collection here. Don't do that. Rasp, and let's get an obvious file. There we go. So, floats, rasp, and file. And I've got a couple videos on this if you want to see a lot more detail, but I'm going to hit this roughly for a moment. Focus. Whoa, that's not focused at all. There we go. So this is a float. And a float has the ridges that go all the way across, and they're just one plane going all the way across. Whereas this is a file, and a file has, actually, in this case, it's going up here, it's just going in one direction, and then the cross-hatching starts down here. So there's a bunch of teeth going this way and a bunch of teeth going this way, and usually they're cross-hatched. Not always. You see, is this side? Yeah, this side's smooth, so these are all one line going across. This is also a curved tooth file. And the big difference between is it a float or is it a file is what is it called? And kind of how it's used. Because a float is generally used for woodworking, and it's often what's the word I'm looking for? It's often a softer steel, so it's not fully hardened. In other words, you can come back in and sharpen it with a file later on. Whereas a file is always very, very, very hard, and it will cut into steel. Where's it going with that? Yeah, there are a few instances where you actually use floats for auto body work, like the file holders or float holders. But then there's also rasps. And rasps have teeth. So rather than having all of these lines cutting across them, they're just a bunch of tiny teeth punched into the surface. And every one of those little teeth then cuts. And that's a rasp. So, but yeah, there's a lot of crossover between files and floats. But usually the standard is it's a float if it's soft, and it's a file if it's hardened. They're not always. Red Rose Reproductions actually just put out a series of plain floats, and he has hardened them. So, guess it just comes down to what you call it. What's next? You've got to look.
I was looking at somebody's name and wondering if it's like reading a license plate sometimes.
Yeah.
And
what did you see the other day? MT?
It was half, and then the capital letters MT, and we were like,
half
Matt, half Matt, and then finally I was like,
half
it's
empty.
empty, half empty. We decided they were a very negative personality. But anyways. But if you know James doesn't say the glass is half empty or half full. The glass is
twice as large as it must be. It's the way the engineer answers it.
Anyways. Can you tell we were not here last week? I feel like there's lots of pent up, like, not.
Last week I was stuck in the theater with the kids' production. Yay!
Daniel Taylor asks, what's the most satisfying clunk in your shop?
Well, that's an interesting question.
I know, I thought that was a different one.
Satisfying clunk? I don't know. Probably has something to do with, oh, yeah, it does have a good ring to it. I don't know. I'd have to play with
I
that.
was
It's
thinking
probably
it's when
metal.
you cut something and it goes plunk.
Well, the most satisfying sound is the Japanese saw when you pull it out and it goes.
Is that a clunk?
No, it's not a clunk.
It's more of a
That's
clang.
a sound that every time when Luke's here, the two
No,
of us always comment on
It's
it.
your shoes. Clunk, 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 clunk,
Yeah,
clunk,
you know.
clunk. Oh, come on. It's been a long time since you've danced in this shop.
Yeah, maybe I should do some tap dancing, because there's something about clogs on the floor that's probably the answer. That's probably the answer.
It's a
You've
slap
heard of soft
happy
shoe.
night.
Well, this is hard shoe.
Achoo. Anyways, Hopman asks, what's the best way to dry an 18 by 36 cherry log? I waxed both ends to prevent checking.
Yeah, 18 by 36.
Yes.
If it's still a log, slice it down the middle. Get the thing cut in half. Do not let it be a solid log, because you will split it out, and the check will not be where you want it to be, and it will be annoying. At least cut it in half, right down the middle, straight down the pith. Make one cut. Then you will have less chance of checking. But as to the best way to dry it.
Sorry, I'm finding the question again. Yeah.
Don't put it in a really, really dry place. Like I've heard some people say, stick it in your attic, and that will dry it out instantly. And yes, it will, but it will dry it too fast. You don't want to air dry too fast. If you're kiln drying it, yes, you're heating it up, but you're also dehumidifying the air. And that's the bigger thing, is you're actually putting it in a dry space that might not be quite as hot. You're not actually cooking the wood. My preferred wood, if you want to work with it with hand tools, is just to put it outside, put it underneath a tarp, lift it up off the ground, allow airflow underneath the tarp, but with enough of an overhang so that the rain isn't going to hit it directly, and just let it sit there for 2 years. Come back to it later, and there's something about really slow-dried, air-dried wood that is so pleasing to work with. It is very, very pleasing with hand tools. I actually have a couple slabs out here for my dream bench. They are 6 inches thick. I think it's 6 inches thick. They're 12-foot long slabs, and I have them sitting underneath a tarp on the north end of the house, so they're not directly in sunlight. And they're going to be there for probably they've been there for almost a year now. It'll probably be another 2 years before they're ready. So just slow and steady wins the race. But if you want to do it faster, vacuum kiln is the way to go. What's next?
We have a super chat.
Woo!
It says, Dad Gamet
Dadgammit.
goes, 22 minutes in and no mom joke yet? Sheesh. Get with it, viewers. Sarah matters too. And I've been finding jokes for you, Dad Gamet. I have. I've been doing my due diligence.
Well, what do we got?
All right, ready?
Yep.
Why won't swords ever go obsolete?
What?
Because they're cutting edge technology.
Get to the point already.
Wasn't my best one, but you know, we gotta warm up for it.
What's the next one then?
No, they got a super chat for another joke.
Oh.
Let's see. Clockman 45. When you are looking for a good way to do veneer work, is a vacuum bag and a pump worth it?
If you're going to be doing a lot of veneer work, and by a lot, I mean you're planning on doing 2 or 3 veneer projects in the next year, a vacuum bag is well worth the money. You get an immense amount of even and smooth down pressure. It really just does the trick very, very nicely. If you're going to be doing traditional veneer panel clamping, it is a pain, and you're going to spend a whole day making a veneer clamp. And it works very well, but it's a lot of extra work. Whereas a vacuum bag is so quick and easy, and it does the job better than you can get with a traditional veneer clamp. So, yeah, if you're planning on doing a couple of them, it's well worth spending the money to get that. The expensive thing on a veneer vacuum bag is getting the vacuum pump. You can rent those. Actually, one of the cheapest places to rent them is from auto parts stores. They rent them for pulling a vacuum on the air conditioning systems in cars. You hook one of those up, and that works very well. You won't get enough vacuum force for most things with a household vacuum. You'll get some vacuum force from it, but not that much. So I would stay away from those ones. Yeah, hope that answers your question. What's next?
Dad Gamet super chatted a question now.
Dad Gamet, well, thank you. What you got?
Speaking of air dried versus kiln, I have always heard that kiln is more stable. Thoughts?
Yes, kiln dried, because you're actually heating it up. You're changing the structure of the cells in the wood, and because of that, they don't take on moisture quite as quickly as air dried wood. And so, because of that, if you're putting it in a place where it's going to see a large seasonal swing, the kiln dried wood won't move quite as much. It will still move, but it won't move quite as much as the air dried wood. Air dried wood breathes far more. Now, will you notice it if you're in an air-conditioned house? Absolutely no, you won't notice the difference. If you put the furniture outside, side by side, you'll probably notice the difference between the two. But yes, kiln-dried wood is a little bit more stable. Is it enough that it would make a difference for me? And no, I don't know of a single project where the difference between them would come into the equation. Yeah, I can't think of anything. What's next? Oh, he's got a mom joke. Yeah.
Do you know what my last thought was as I taped a piranha to my boomerang?
What?
This is going to come back to bite me.
Yes. See, now you're getting better.
I know. I just
You gotta warm up.
gotta warm up. I'm a little rusty from a week off.
Yes.
I knew you'd like that one.
What's next?
Lincoln Dickerson. Hi, curious about wooden soles. When using a metal plane, we wax or oil the plane regularly. Are wooden sole planes made out of rosewood, for instance, that has oil in it naturally?
No, most wooden planes, most of these are actually made out of beech. Rosewood would make a good one, but I mean the amount of oil in a really oily wood is minuscule and unmeasurable. And so people really make a big deal about oily woods. And really there are very few instances where the oil makes any difference. Sometimes in some applications for glue up, but for the oil in oily function, no, there's not enough glue in there, not enough oil in there to make a difference that ways. And so yes, you'd still want to oil, wax, and lubricate them one way or the other. I don't do it all the time. I mean, there's a lot of applications where I just don't use it that much. But every now and then I'll be running a board, I'll be running a plane. It's just like, it feels like I'm putting more pressure into it than I need to. And I'll wax it up and it's like, oh yeah, that's nice. Especially with the newer steel bodies, the new, what's the, not durable steel, ductile steel. Those tend to have a little bit more friction in them than the old cast iron. And so I'm finding I'm oiling those more often. But yeah, even if you make it out of something like teak or rosewood, you're going to want to oil and wax it just as much as you would if it were out of hard maple or beechwood. Now that being said, a wooden sole sticks far less than even a cast iron, and so you don't need to do that as much. But there wouldn't be enough oil in the rosewood or something of that nature to negate that. So, hope that answers the question.
Okay. I did put in the chat that I don't know that we'll get to any new questions from here out.
Looks like
besides,
we got quite a long list.
Yes, they have lots of questions this week, which isn't bad.
Unless you throw in a super chat, then we will get to it.
Let's see. Jerome Ulrich asked, is checking a concern with green wood turning, such as bowls and cups?
Yes, especially if you let it dry too quickly. So one of the ways with turning, like bowls particularly, is you rough turn the bowl and you get it to a rough dimension that's much, much thicker than you want it to be. And then you will dry it in a rough blank. And once it's fully dried, then you come back and you do your final turning, because it is so much easier to turn it green than when it is dry. The problem is, if you have that big bowl and you dry it too fast, it will check and crack right down the sides. And ain't nobody likes that. So the way to do that is you want to keep it in a somewhat moist environment. And usually what you want to do is put it into a bag that has other green wood chips. So all the chips you just had from turning the bowl, stuff those all with the bowl into a bag and set it aside for a while and come back to it and check its moisture from time to time. Let it dry as slowly as possible and there'll be less chance of checking. Can you read that question one more time? I missed a portion of it.
Is checking a concern with green wood turning?
Then yes, it is a concern. It's something to think about. Because anytime you turn something green, anytime you do anything with something green, it's going to change when it dries. It's going to warp and twist and become wood. And so you always have to be thinking ahead about that. But it is much easier to work the wood when it's wet than when it's dry. So a lot of times you want to remove as much material as you can when it's wet, but still leave some so when it dries and warps, you can then bring it back to the final shape you want it to be in. What's next?
Edward Handrich asked, when joining boards to make a top panel for a radiator cover, how do you keep the joints from separating?
Top panel for radiator?
Are you, like, on a radiator?
Can you read that one more time?
When joining boards to make a top panel for a radiator cover, how do you keep the joints from separating?
Oh, I think I see what you're saying. So you want to join two boards together, but they're going to be in a moist environment. At least I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. I don't know what you mean by a radiator cover. Like a house heating radiator, a box to go over top of it. Oh, in that case, it won't be in a moist environment. It'll be in a very dry environment. Your wood at regular room temperature is going to end up drying and shrinking even more. And so in that case, if you're doing something good with a good PVA that has been clamped solidly, or a decent hide glue or epoxy, you're really not going to have problems with the glue joint particularly. Where you're going to have problems with is any standard joinery, mortise and tenons, dovetails, and things of that nature. You have to think about how is the wood going to expand and contract, and where is it going to be moving, so that you leave space for it to move. So depending upon what method you're using to create it, it really comes down to thinking about your joinery and making sure that it is flexible, the wood will expand and contract the way it wants to. So like in a board this way, the wood will not expand and contract lengthwise. Lengthwise won't change. However, widthwise on the board, will change. The board will want to get thinner when it gets drier and bigger when it gets wetter. It will also tend to have a cupping and twisting depending upon how the grain is going through the board and how it was cut out of the wood. But the big thing you're thinking about is the expansion contraction this way in the board. So if this is captured into a groove with a frame running around it, then when this shrinks, when it gets dry, there's going to now be a gap on the sides. Or if this were to in turn get wet, it could actually blow the frame out. So you have to make sure that you have if it's going into a groove all the way around, you want to make sure you have space in that groove so it can expand and contract. Also, you want the tongue on this to be long enough so when it shrinks, it's not going to withdraw out of the wood. So it's a lot of just really thinking through all those connections one by one. I'm trying to think if I have a direct resource on that. I don't have any direct resource on joinery. Maybe I'll have to do that sometime. I have several videos on understanding wood movement. And once you kind of wrap your brain around how is the wood actually going to move, then you can understand how the joint... Inhaled some sawdust. It's right there. Sorry. There, I think I got it. Yeah, once you understand how the wood is going to move, you can think through how that movement will affect everything and what it's going to be pushing on and pulling on, so you can make your designs to fit into that. If you have a specific one, feel free to send me pictures of what you're designing. I'd be glad to take a look at it. What's next?
Hotman asked, what is a good froe, and do you have any recommendations?
When it comes to the actual company of it, that really doesn't matter too much. And a froe does not have to be high quality, other than the joint from the eye to the blade. You want to make sure it's not a welded joint. You want to get something that was drifted. In other words, when the blacksmith makes it, you want this all to be made out of one piece. And the blacksmith heated this up and literally drove a spike through here to create the eye. So it's all out of one piece. If it's welded, when you go to twist this, you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on that. And that's usually where these break, is at this joint. Because the way they work, here, let me put this back in. The way they work is you drive it down on the wood, and you put this whole blade down into the wood, and then you twist it. And you're going to be putting all that twisting force on, so you're actually creating a lever that allows you to split the wood. And all of that force is then focused on this joint where all that pressure is put. So you're going to be, you want this to be strong. So not welded, which are most all of the cheap ones you're going to get on Amazon are welded there. Don't get those. They will break. I've seen several of them split out like that. Get one that's blacksmithed. If you know a blacksmith, they can make these pretty quickly. They don't have to be incredibly sharp. They don't have to be incredibly good. You're not shaping the wood with it. You're just smashing it down in with a hammer and then using it to leverage and split. Usually a place where I'm going to suggest people go is Etsy. You'll find a lot of people on Etsy who are blacksmiths, and they make them up at relatively good prices. That's where I've gotten a lot of the blacksmith-made things, my ads, a couple hatchets, the froe. Etsy's a great place to go for that. Oh,
You okay?
got a hunk of dust or something that hit the back of my throat, causing me issue. What's next?
Let's see. Ken asked, what really crazy planes do you recommend? Compass plane.
What's that?
Compass plane, right? Isn't it?
No, compass plane is one of the last things you should get. It's
Well, that's why he said a really crazy plane.
well, yeah, but it's one you never use though.
Didn't say he was
You know, a 50 or a 45, yeah, I use those all the time. It's just a great plow plane. It allows you to make all sorts of different grooves and tongue and groove, beading and things of that nature. A good 45 or 55, 45 or 50 is a great one. 55, there really is, unless you do a lot of molding, and in that case you're probably going to want to get a molding plane for the ones you want to do. 55 is an absolute pain to use. The reason Stanley didn't sell too many 55s. That and they were very expensive. Shoulder plane, maybe. I don't use that one that much.
So he clarifies. He says, nah, 50 and a 45 ain't crazy. I'm talking high-end banana pants.
Oh, you're talking like Sauer and Steiner. Yeah, like $2,500 to $5,000 for a smoothing plane. Yeah. Number one, yeah, that's new in box. There you go. Actually, I have seen a number one in the original packaging with the original tags on it in a really nice looking box. And if you have to ask the price, you don't want to hear it. It's probably one of those that there's like 5 or 6 of them in the whole world. Yeah. Yeah. Sauer and Steiner, go look them up. They're pretty.
Let's see. Tiny Woodshop. Would you ever make a stool with traditional thru tenons?
I have. I actually did a video where I went into the woods with this very chisel, 1/2 inch chisel, and a leather strop. And in the woods, I used this to cut down the tree, to turn the log into usable lumber, and then to cut down another smaller tree and use those legs and shape them down into a square tenon, cut a square hole, put a through tenon, wedged to the top, all with a chisel. So I've done that. You know, basic Windsor chair design just doesn't intrigue me much. And a lot of those simple stools, I don't know, they just don't hold my attention. And so if something's not really grabbing me, it's not something I want to do. And usually I only make things that I want to make. So I haven't done a whole lot of that. Let's see, have I done? I did a simple 3-legged stool. Maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. I did a curved seat stool. That would be about 6 years ago. But I don't think I've done any others since then. Yeah. Cool. What's next?
All right. I think he said his real name is Esteban, if I remember correctly. So, if I want to flatten the back of a chisel that is a lot longer than my stones, am I better off using sandpaper on glass? And what is the cutoff point for you?
You know, honestly, when you're getting into big chisels, like even this one, there's no reason for you to flatten the whole back. You know, if it's visually straight, the back is flat enough. You don't need to flatten the whole thing. You need the tip to be smooth. You don't need it to be perfectly flat. That is overachiever. So it's one of those things that you don't need to do that. So if you're spending a lot of time working on a big chisel trying to flatten the whole thing, then you're chasing something that you're probably only chasing because you want the pleasure of chasing it. But I mean, even for something like this, if I wanted to flatten the whole thing, my normal 3x8 diamond plates are more than big enough for that.
We have clarification. It's a framing chisel.
Oh, like a slick? Even more so. That doesn't need to be flat at all. Slicks, like this one, let's see how far out that is. I mean, I could have a good 1/16 of an inch. Yeah, I got more than that. I've got, okay, so if I have it touching the tip up here, I've got 3/16 of an inch gap back here. And it rocks from one to the other. And that's perfectly fine for a slick. You do not need to flatten the whole thing. It just has to be smooth at the tip. Yeah. Because you're not going to use it for fine paring. You're going to be lifting the handle up and scraping with it and gouging wood out. You don't use this to reference a surface to smooth it out. If you're doing that, then you're building something wrong, or you're chasing perfection. So yeah, slicks you don't need to worry about flattening much of anything, as long as they're relatively visually flat. I mean, even this one I can see that there's a bit of a curve. on the back of it. Not a huge issue. So, yeah. But yeah, if you really want to do that on a big one like that, sandpaper on a piece of glass, that would be the best way to go. Yeah. But you're going to be spending a lot of time there. Good luck. What's next?
All right, Anton asked, I'm looking to turn my woodworking hobby into a side business, possibly full-time eventually. What advice would you give to someone like that? Thank you.
Get good tools at the beginning. If you're wanting to turn it into a business and make money, you're not doing it for the fun of it. You are doing it to make money. And having good quality tools up front will save you more time through the rest of their life than anything else. So spend the money up front and buy the tool once. Don't buy the halfway tool. Yeah, because time is money, and time is the biggest investment you're going to be putting into anything you make. And if you can make it faster with the same quality, that's where you can make your money. That's probably the biggest single piece of advice I have for going into something for a financial reason. Because honestly, when you're selling things that you're making, very rarely are you selling the product. You are usually selling a name. You're selling a brand. You're selling something that people know what you're making. Unless you're doing like flea market sales. And then you're selling small tchotchke things that you can pump out and make a bunch of them. But if you're looking at selling furniture, people come to you because they know you make good furniture. You make a really cool piece and they want to buy it from you. They're not particularly buying that piece as much as they're buying your work. And so developing that name is where the business is at. It's not about becoming a great woodworker. It's about actually having a name that people want to buy woodworking from. Now you get that from making good furniture. You get that from making good quality stuff, and people realize that. But building that name and that brand is really where the game is at. So have fun with it though. What's next? Another 13 minutes or so?
Yeah, I'm just going to go through them and we
get to what we can get to.
Get to what we get to. Because Sarah's got to be up for a staff meeting in the morning. Let's see. Esteban asked, I have a corner chisel that has a spur in the corner. It's not like the one on your video on corner chisels. It's really tiny and deliberately manufactured into it. Do I need slipstones to sharpen it?
A spur in the corner. I am a little confused as what you are particularly talking about. So here we bring this in. So this is my corner chisel, or one of mine. And I think you're talking about like a little nipple that would be right on the corner here where this sticks out a little bit farther. Usually that's because there's steel in here and this has been sharpened rounded. And so if you don't get this corner really sharp, it causes a little tip to come out here. And that's usually caused because of poor sharpening. But I don't know what you would mean by a spur. I'd be interested. Unless you're talking about one that has a wing. Sometimes they'll have these wings that stick up this way. And those are boat building corner chisels. In that case, you actually sharpen them more like a boat building adze. Trying to think of anything else that would fit that characteristic. I think that's it. But feel free to send me pictures. I'd be interested in seeing what you're talking about with that. Anything else in particular? No, I can't think of it.
All right, Ken Carlile wants to know, what do you use to clean a hand-stitched rasp?
I use a card file. And it's, this one is actually a really fine, cheap wire brush on a paddle. I think I got this one on Amazon years ago. Here, like this one's actually nice and dirty. Let's show this. So, this one I've got a bunch of junk in here. Look at this one. I've got some serious junk in here. It's not coming out. Wow. Well, in that case, I'm going to grab my marking knife and pick those pieces out. This is actually chunks of something or other that's not coming out. There we go. Oop. Some people really do not like the idea of using wire brush. You can actually get these with stiff nylon. I just find the stiff nylon just doesn't work as well. And I haven't had any problems at all with the wire brush. It works great. It really doesn't hurt anything on them. So at least that's my 2 cents on it. But yeah, stiff brush. That's how you run them out. What's next?
All right. Kill bugs quick. Not originally kill bugs squeak, I'm assuming, as my brain initially read. James, what is the best method to make the corners of extra long homemade clamps?
What, could you read that again?
The best method to make the corners of extra long homemade clamps.
The corners. I don't know what you mean by that. Clarification, please. The corners? If you're talking about like the headstock and tailstock, that's basically where what in the world did I do with my hand?
Are you bleeding?
No.
Oh.
Like I crushed it with a file. Must have been leaning. Oh, I had a file over here I was leaning on. Yeah, there's hundreds of different designs, and I've got probably half a dozen different clamp videos making different ones. The best one, there really isn't a best one. Homemade clamps, if you have wooden head and tail, they just never perform quite as well as a good metal one. I mean, they're okay. They can do the job. They can get it done. And I've had several that I needed to do it, and I needed another clamp, so I made it. But I still end up going back to my my wooden beam clamps that have metalled heads.
We have clarification. C-clamps.
What's that?
C-clamps? Does that make a difference?
C-clamps, no.
No.
Unless you're talking about hand screw clamps. But I don't know what you mean by making the corners on those.
I don't know.
Sorry.
Send a picture with an arrow pointing to what you were trying to ask.
Got a couple videos on making hand screw clamps too. Made them with wooden screws as well as from kits. What's next?
Rolling Pastures Farm asks, got a favorite wood to work with?
Oh, white oak. White oak. Though I have really been enjoying the Brazilian rosewood. Very, very difficult to work, but incredibly pleasing. That is beautiful stuff to finish off. But white oak is incredibly difficult to work with, but just absolutely gorgeous when you finish it, and it's such a pleasing wood to look at afterwards. I really, really like white oak. Not flat sawn, quarter sawn, but yeah, white oak. What's next?
MFP07 asked, what advice would you give a beginner who has done a few projects for starting to get good tools?
Can you read that again?
What advice would you give a beginner who has done a few projects for starting to get good tools? Like, what good tools should they get?
The best piece of advice I can give you is don't buy good tools because you want to buy good tools. Buy a good tool because you have a project coming up that needs that tool. Don't buy a tool because, ooh, I think I can use that in the future. Those are how you buy tools you're never going to use again. Buy a tool that will fit the project coming up. So you're looking at the project coming up and you're thinking, how do I make this joint? This tool would make that easily. Buy the tools for that. When it comes to the best tool to buy for a particular one, a lot of times that's just personal preference, because different people want different things and different styles and different ways to hold it. And so you're going to have very different things. Like if you buy from Veritas, Veritas is really good at remaking tools. In other words, they take the tool, the old design that's been there forever, and they say, okay, we could just take this and improve it, or we can wipe the slate and come up with something brand new that, yeah, has a lot of representatives to it because it's doing the same task, but it's got a whole new vibe to it. And Veritas is really good about remaking things. Whereas you go to Lee Nielsen is amazing about, let's take something that's working, something that does really, really well, and we're going to make a couple tweaks to it and put it back out there. So Lee Nielsen's tools look a lot like traditional Stanley tools, whereas Veritas's all look fairly modern and sleek because they're a different design. So you kind of have to look at the ethos of the tool you're getting. Because different people want different things. If you want to do the traditional things, you're probably going to go more the Lee Nielsen route. If you want something that is far more user-friendly and has the bells and whistles and the extra new things, then Veritas is the way to go. What's next?
Jeff Thompson says, hey, what's an easy way to get the blade of a duplex plane square to take an even cut across when making a rebate cut? I have issues with either side being higher or lower on the cut.
Yeah, trial and error. Especially if it's a split iron. Well, unless you're talking like a window jam plane, in which case then it's two separate irons, and then it's just a lot of fiddling with it and getting it set up. But most of the time it's just the fiddling. The more complex the plane is, the more the fiddling is. The more jiggy it is, the more fiddling there is. And yeah, there really is no best way. Sorry, wish I could give you a great, do this and it's done. But yeah, get better at fiddling. What do we got? Is that super chat?
It is. Peter DeWitt says, just a mom joke. Happy belated Mother's Day.
Thanks, Peter.
Just for a mom joke. We figured, Peter. Thanks. So I had a great idea, and I started a new business selling trampolines in Prague. But I'm having a problem. I'm getting a lot of orders, but the checks keep bouncing. You got that one?
I like that one. That's a good one. That one's top of the list.
Does everyone know where Prague is located?
He who laughs last. Usually had to have it explained.
I hope, Peter, that was...
I like that one.
You like that one? I thought you'd like that one. It's sometimes they're really good to read, but to tell them, that's a long road. Yeah.
One more?
Yeah, let's see. I was trying to think of one that doesn't have a video that I remember. This is actually an interesting one. I don't know if you've told this one. Greg Preston asks, how did old timers know if wood was dry enough?
Trial and error. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and the other thing is that one of the big problems that we have is air conditioning. And if you air condition your house year round, you don't have a problem with it. But if you turn your air conditioning on and off and on and off, air conditioning dries out the house immensely. And then you turn the air conditioning off and all that moisture rushes back in and you have a huge swell. And so, I mean, traditionally, you would have one big swell as things got moist during the year, and then they would get dry later on. So there'd be one big, long expansion and contraction phase for the wood. And so you didn't have to worry about moisture quite as much. You made the joinery with that in mind. And at that point, you kind of feel it, or you know that if the wood's been sitting out there for 2 years, it's dry. And when it comes to air drying things, you're not trying to turn the wood around really quickly. And the big reason why everything's kiln dried now is because it allows you to go from tree to product really quickly. And you don't have a ton of product sitting around just waiting. And historically, the mills that actually turned out large quantities of material, didn't have a huge problem with stock sitting around because it didn't take up that much space in comparison to how much they were producing. And so knowing when it was dry, it was like, that should be dry by now. And you worked with it. So it's one of those things where we've gotten very, very particular about things because we have much better ways of measuring things. But historically, you didn't have to be as particular as we are now. So, interesting question, though. I think that'll do it. So next week, I've got Owen. So if anyone's been watching woodworking shorts on YouTube, you've probably seen this weird Irish guy who does woodworking. He is going to be, is it next week? Yeah, or is it the 29th?
Do you want me to look on the calendar?
Yeah, I think it's next week because he's going to be coming on for a.
Nope, it's the 30th.
It's the 30th. Okay, no, 2 weeks. But yeah, we're looking forward to that when he comes out, and we're going to have a fun time.
Because we're doing it at 5.
Yes, and that one
Central.
that one will be earlier because he is in Ireland, so we don't want him waking up at 2 a.m. to come on and join us. So I'm looking forward to that. But that'll be in 2 weeks. Next week, I think we're doing the next joinery window joint. So stay tuned for that. But on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. So until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.